Good. In that case, let us begin. Okay, Parshas Toldot. Again, the Torah that I'm going to be sharing is from my Rosh Yeshiva, Chaim Yaakov Goldvicht. So one of the Rosh Rosh Yeshiva Kerem B'Yavne. And this is really going to be a two-part series. He's going to introduce a number of major concepts in this Parsha that he's then going to weave through many of the other Parshios, particularly next week. So this will be one of two. Let's jump right in. The Torah tells us, Vayigdalu haNe'arim. We're told of the birth of the twins, Yaakov and Esav, in this week's Parsha. And the Torah tells us, Vayhi Esav ish yodei tzayid ish sadeh. The young boys grow up. And Esav becomes a Yodei Tzayid in Ish Sadeh, one who knows how to hunt, a man of the field. Yaakov Ish Tam Yoshev Oalim. Whereas Yaakov becomes an Ish Tam, a simple, whole, perfect person, one who dwells in the tents. Vaye'ehav Yitzchak es Esav ki tzayid b'fiv. And Yitzchak loved Esav because game was in his mouth. V'Rivka oheves es Yaakov. Whereas Rivka loved Yaakov. When we read through these parshas, these stories, there's a major story in the beginning of our parsha, the birth of the twins as they grow, of course, the selling of the birthright. And then at the end of the parsha, we have the episode of the stealing of the brachos. Yitzchak ages, he's becoming blind, he's afraid he's going to die soon, and he calls his son Esav to provide him a meal so that he can give him a bracha. And Esav, of course, as we know, does. And Yaakov swoops in under the guidance of his mother, Rivka, dresses up as Esav, and comes in and, in effect, swipes that particular bracha. And there are, I would say, two major questions that we have to tackle when we go through these particular stories. The first is, how is Yitzchak so misled? How does it happen that Yitzchak Avinu, we view Esav as a rasha, as a wicked person, and it seems it's so perplexing that, as we read in the beginning, Yitzchak loved Esav because tzayid b'fiv. The simple meaning of the pasuk, of course, we're going to address this. This is a shiur. We address medrash much in the shiur, but the simple meaning of the pasuk is Esav provided Yitzchak with food. He was a hunter, and fresh steaks were always coming, and Yitzchak loves Esav. And lest one think from the beginning of the parsha, when the Torah describes that as a love, well, he just liked the food, at the end of the parsha, he desires to give Esav the bracha. He carries it through. The only thing that stops him is that his wife, Rivka, has a whole plan to sneak Yaakov in to take it. But until the very end, Yitzchak plans on giving his son Esav the bracha. And any understanding of this story has to address the question of, how did Yitzchak become so misled, and what actually was he thinking? Second question, which is a corollary of that, is how exactly does it work that Yaakov can steal a bracha? Does that even work? That you can steal a bracha like that? And there seems to be very little communication. Yaakov already had bought a birthright. His mother doesn't seem to know that. His father doesn't seem to know that. He has to go through this whole plan. Where does that fit in? Yaakov, who is Titein Emes Liyaakov, who is defined as a person of truth, who here needs to, as an Ish Tam, this whole and perfect person, go through this entire act. The entire story begs the question for an understanding. So what I'd like to do is share the Rosh Yeshiva's approach to this. It's a very beautiful approach. It's a complex approach. Again, we're going to have to address it over 2 weeks. And he starts with the description, as we read from the opening pasuk, of the way in which the Torah highlights Esav. And there are two phrases which the Torah uses regularly, over and over again, in describing Esav. One is, as the Torah says, he was a Yodei Tzayid. He knew how to hunt. He was a person defined by that. An Ish Yodea Tzayid, man who understood hunting, an Ish Sadeh. We use the word Ish twice. So we're defining the essence of Esav as a hunter and a person who was an Ish Sadeh, a man of the field. And we see these phrases come up again at the end of that first source. The reason why Yitzchak, we're told, loves Esav, because he was this hunter. Something about that Yitzchak loved that. When Yitzchak invites Esav to provide him with a meal because he wants to give him a bracha, and source number 2, later on in the Parsha, he again uses those two phrases. He tells his son Esav, take all your tools, your utensils of hunting, your bow, utzei hasadeh, go out to the field, and hunt me a game. Yitzchak could have simply said, give me a meal, but he uses those same two phrases again. Go to the field, he says, Vitsudali tzayid, in order to get me this fresh game. When Yaakov comes in to steal the bracha, we again find that usage. The Torah describes this in the third source, Vayigash Vayishaklo. Now, this is Yaakov who's in there, and he approaches his father Yitzchak, and they kiss. Yitzchak kisses his son Yaakov. He, of course, thinks it's Esav. Vayorach es reach bigadov vayivarcheu. And Yitzchak smells the reach, the smell of his clothing. Rivka had given Yaakov, of course, the clothing of Esav. Vayomer re'ei reach beni kireach sadeh. I smell, Yitzchak says, the smell of my son. It's like the smell of the field. Asher baruchu Hashem, but Hashem is blessed. Chazal here understand a level of Gan Eden, but the words again that Yitzchak uses are words of this field. The field and hunting. Again, one last source just to show where these come up. When the story unfolds and Yaakov gets the bracha, and then he exits stage left, and then Esav comes in, and Yitzchak, begins to realize what happens. The Torah says, "Vayecherad Yitzchak charado gedolan ma'od." Source number 4, trembled, a great and awesome trembling. Vayomer mi'efo hu hatzad tzayid vayoveli va'ochel. Who is the one who hunted the game and brought it to me, and I ate, and I gave him the bracha, gam baruch yiyeh? Why does he have to say, who's the one who hunted me the game? He can just say, who fooled me? Who came in here with fresh? He uses again, who's the one who hunted and came in here? These idea of the Esav's being an ish sadeh, man of the field, and being an yodea tzayid, one who knows how to hunt, pokes its head over and over again within this story. Now, Chazal also pick up right away on the idea that Esav was a tzayid, was one who knew how to hunt. And Rashi quotes the drasha, not that he knew how to hunt, and always, in going back to the first source where the Torah describes Yitzchak's love of Esav, ki tzayid bifiv, the simple meaning was that Esav provided game into the mouth of Yitzchak. Chazal darshan to read it, Kitzayid bifiv, that Yitzchak was hunted by Esav because of Esav's mouth. He made a game of his father Yitzchak with his mouth, and he fooled his father Yitzchak. Rashi explains here in source number 5, Latsur v'laramos esaviv bifiv. Esav knew how to fool his father. So it's not just that the Chazal, of course, are bothered just because Esav provided meat, fresh meat, gave Yitzchak avinu. He was so fooled by that. So Chazal say, no. Esav was a lot more cunning than just providing meat. He knew how to fool his father with his words. Vishoalo, Abba. Esav used to ask the questions. He would say, Abba, Heich ma'asrin es hamelach v'es hateven. How do you take off meiser? How do you tithe? Melach is salt, and teven is straw. Now, those two products do not require meiser. Meiser is something that you take off your agricultural products. It has to be an edible product that you grow and that you eat, and then you bring into your silo and you take off truma and meiser. Salt is not something that you grow. It's not something that you take meiser from. Teven is straw. It's not a food product. It's a byproduct of the growing of the food. Doesn't require any meiser. And the basic knowledge of Hilchos Maisros, if you learn Maseches Maisros, Mishnayos, you'll know, of course, salt and teven doesn't need. But Esav would ask his father these questions. How do you take off meiser? He didn't ask, do you take off meiser? He said, how do you take off meiser from salt and from straw? So Kasover Aviv, Rashi writes, his father thought, you medaktek b'mitzvos. Wow, what a son I have. He's so careful in mitzvos that he's even asking, how do you take off meiser from these two products, which do not even require mice to be taken off. But Yitzchak was fooled by the questions that his son would ask. He thought his son was a real Talmud Chacham and was a real Osek in mitzvahs and was medaktek and careful, and that fooled his father Yitzchak. Now, the Maharal addresses how exactly or why exactly Chazal saw in that question that Esav is trying to fool his father. Out of all the things in the world that Esav could ask, that he could try to prove to his father that he's very careful in mitzvahs, why this idea of taking off meiser from salt and from straw? So the Maharal expresses a very beautiful idea. It's at the bottom of source number 5. Says the Maharal, these two things, the reason why they're exempt, Hamelech she'enu davar ba'atzmo. Salt is nothing unto itself. Ve'enu omed rak l'seis tam ba'acher. Salt is there to give taste to something else. You can't eat salt. You don't make a meal of salt. Salt is just a spice that provides taste to something else. Similarly, hateven, the straw, eno davar ba'atzmo. It's not really anything on its own. Raku shomer lepri. It protects and guards the actual grain as the grain is growing. So meiser is only from dvarim which are themselves the product. So you wouldn't take meiser from salt, which only provides taste to the essence. The salt is not the essence. The straw is just a protection for the grain. You don't take meiser from that. The Esav, says the Maharal, mipnei rama uso, because of his trying to fool and cunning nature, hayo omer sof sof, kevan shahakolu min Hashem yisbarach. He said to his father, Abba, but Hashem gave us everything. Hashem gave us salt to enjoy. Hashem gave us straw to protect the grain. So we have to show our gratitude for that which Hashem gave us. Obviously, he said to his father, you won't take regular meiser because they themselves are not the actual product. But to say nothing, no, it can't be, Abba. How do we show our expression of gratitude for salt and for the straw? And in that question, he fooled his father to think that he was a very medaktek b'mitzvahs, that he was very careful in asking such a question of even the salt which gives the taste and the straw which protects. And so he misled his father. He was able to mislead him. Rivka, his mother, apparently, was not misled by such questions, who saw the nature of her son for what it was. And therefore, she was in love with her son Yaakov. But Esav, she didn't seem to go for it. And Yaakov, Yitzchak, the Torah says, loved his son Esav. Bringing us to this question, okay, he was fooled. It's just a difficult concept to understand exactly how this was able to fool him to such a degree. And to understand that, how this question, this fooling, trying to fool him by showing how careful he was in mitzvahs, expresses itself when you look at the actual bracha that Yitzchak desires to give to his son Esav. We see that this idea of being an ish sadeh and a person who knows how to hunt expresses itself in the exact nature of the bracha that he wanted to give. We often think, when you just hear or think about the story on a superficial level, the impression one gets is that Yitzchak wanted to bless his son Esav with everything, and his wife Rivka realized that that's a terrible mistake, and so she makes sure that Yaakov gets the bracha instead. That would have been a disaster for the Jewish people. But when you actually look at the bracha that he gives, it becomes very, very clear that he actually never intended to give the bracha, capital B, bracha, to Esav. He never thought to do that. Let's take a look at the actual bracha that he gives. Now, the source that we're going to see now, source number 6, is the bracha that he thought he was giving to Esav. He has no idea that the person standing in front of him is his son Yaakov. He thinks it's Esav. He went out to the field, he got the game, he prepared it, he came in, and he's going to give him a bracha. Let's take a look at the actual bracha that Yitzchak gives to what he thinks is his son Esav. And the bracha goes as follows. Yitain lecha ha'elokim mital hashamayim u'mishmanei ha'aretz. May Hashem give you the dew of the heavens and the fatness of the earth, v'rov dagan v'tirosh, and abundant grain and wine. Which, that first line, we would assume, what kind of blessing is that? It's a blessing of prosperity, a physical, gashmius prosperity that you should have dew, you should have fatness of the earth, you should have grain and wine, and be successful in all of your endeavors. People shall serve you, other regimes shall prostrate themselves to you. You should be a lord to your kinsmen, and your mother's sons will prostrate themselves to you. Those who curse you shall be cursed, and those who bless you shall be blessed. Now, there's some major omissions when you think about the blessings that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov receive from Hashem, and they transmit down from generation to generation. There are some obvious things that are missing in this particular bracha. This is a bracha of prosperity. It's a blessing that things should go well. You should be powerful. Other nations should serve you. Those who curse you shall be cursed. But its primary function is Yitain lecha Elokim mital hashamayim. You should have dew and fatness of earth and be successful. That's the bracha that Yitzchak intended to give to his son Esav. He then discovers that he was fooled, and it was indeed Yaakov in front of him. When he sends Yaakov away at the end of the Parsha, because Esav now wants to kill him, and he says, his wife Rivka says to her husband Yitzchak, we got to send Yaakov to find a wife. He can't stay here. She knows that Esav wants his head. So Yitzchak sends his son Yaakov away, and he blesses him on the way out. That blessing is in source number 7. Vayikra Yitzchak al Yaakov vayivarech oso. He gives him a blessing. He says, no women, you cannot marry from the daughters of Canaan, just like his father Avram had said to him. Go back to where your mother came from, and Hashem will be with you, and he will bless you. As birkos Avraham lecha ulizaracha itach. And Hashem should give you the bracha of Avram to you, to your children, l'rishtecha es eretz migurecha, to inherit this land. Here we see what we would have always assumed would have been the bracha that Yitzchak would give. It's the birchas Avraham, the bracha that was given to Avram, the bracha of inheriting the land. This is the bracha that we've been waiting for. Who is going to inherit the spiritual legacy of Avram? Yitzchak never intended to give that directly to Esav. To Esav, he gave the bracha of physical prosperity. You should have dew and fatness, and everything should be good for you. To Yaakov, when he sends him away, he's got tucked in his back pocket this bracha, which he never intended to give to Esav, which is, you should have the birchos Avraham and to inherit the land. And indeed, Chazal pick up on this and see that there was always an intention to give two brachas. The Medrash in the Pirkei Rebbe Elazar says, darshan the pasuk in Sefer Koheles, Tov achris davar mereishiso. The end matter is better than its beginning. Says Shlomo HaMelech in Koheles, that which comes at the end is often better than that which is in the beginning. Says the Medrash, where do we see that a second thing is better than the first? Habrachos harishonos sheberach Yitzchak liYaakov. The first bracha that Yitzchak gives in the end to Yaakov, it was supposed to be there, but the first bracha Yaakov gets is al tadalei shemayim ve'al dagan haaretz. It's about dew, it's about grain, it's about crops. Tov mehen achriz davar. But what's much better than that is what comes later. Elu habrachos achronos. If you had to choose, which bracha would you want to get? The bracha of good crops or the bracha of Avraham? The bracha of Eretz Yisrael, there's no question the second bracha is a better bracha. So the Medrash darshans, Tov achris davar merishiso. The end is better than the beginning. Birchos Yesod Olam. The bracha of the foundation of the world, the second bracha that Yitzchak had held onto, ve'ein bahem hefsek, that has no end. Lo boilam hazeh, lo boilam haba, the bracha of Avraham Avinu. That's much better. But it's clear, Chazal pick up, there were always going to be two brachas. Yitzchak never intended to give Esav that bracha of Avraham. He did intend to give him the bracha of prosperity, of physical blessings, of Gashmias. Yaakov got what he was always going to get. And in fine, we find this exact same idea that Yaakov himself, when he's arguing with his mother, who's trying to convince him to get dressed up and sneak in and steal the bracha, and Yaakov says, it's a big risk, he says, Ulai yimusheni avi, my father's going to feel me, and he's going to realize it's me, it's Yaakov, it's not his son Esav. I'm going to be like a fool who's trying to fool him. I'm going to be in trouble. And he's going to bring me a klala and not a bracha. So the Medrash picks up. Why does he say he's going to give me a klala and not a bracha? Says the Medrash, afilu bracha achas shehu asid litein basof. Even that one bracha that he was going to give me in the end anyway, and he knows, now he's not even going to give me that. You hear the risk, Ima? He says to his mother, I don't know that we should try to do this, because if I chap Esav's bracha, but he catches me, then he won't even give me the bracha that was destined to me, which he was going to give me in the end. I don't know that it's worth risking that by trying to get Esav's bracha also. And she says, it is. It's upon me if anything happens to you, but this is what needs to happen. You do need to take Esav's bracha, and you'll end up getting your own as well. So it's clear in Chazal that the bracha that Yitzchak is fooled into giving his son Esav, he wasn't fooled to the degree that he thought Esav was Yaakov. He knew there was Yaakov and there was Esav, but he wanted to give him a bracha anyway, and a bracha of prosperity. To understand that, let's take a look at what place does Esav occupy in Jewish thought. How should we view Esav? Esav is a unique character because when you go up a generation, so Avram had two children, he had many more later, but he had Yishmael and he has Yitzchak. But Yishmael didn't come from Sarah. Yishmael came from Hagar. So he only has one son with Sarah. So the Birchas Avraham, the line, the lineage, the spiritual legacy goes to that one son that came from his wife Sarah. But now Yitzchak, when he marries Rivka, and he's the inheritor of the Birchas Avraham, but he has with his wife two children. His wife Esav, his son Esav, and Yaakov. They're both from his wife, his primary and only wife. What's the status of an Esav in Jewish thought? Where does he fit? Says the Medrash in source number 10, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, take a look at which month I gave the Torah, the month of Sivan, when we celebrate Shavuos. Which month we receive the Torah? B'mazel Te'umim. Every month has a constellation. What's the constellation of Sivan? Te'umim, twins. Why is the Torah given under the constellation of Te'umim, of twins? Says the Medrash, She'im bikesh Esav harashal is gayer velasos tshuva. If Esav desires to come back, we use the word still is gayer because we went through a gerus at Kabbalah Torah also. We learned a lot of the Hilchos gerus of conversion from standing at Har Sinai. If Esav wishes to go through that process like we did, to do tshuva, v'lavo, v'lilmod Torah, and Esav says, I want to learn, Yavo v'yilmod u'mekablo ani, I would accept him, says Hashem. And I gave the Torah in the month of Sivan, whose constellation is Te'umim, because Esav should be here. It's the two of them, Yaakov and Esav, but it ends up only, of course, being Yaakov, but Esav is Ro'i, fits to be there. And we see this idea of Esav having had a share or should be there in a couple of other places. Let me just show you a couple of them where we see the role that Esav had potential to play. Look at source number 11. The Gemara Maseches Kedushin is trying to understand that if in the non-Jew, does a son inherit the father midin Torah? Meaning, is it a Torah? What's the Torah's halacha when a non-Jewish man dies? What happens to his estate? So the Gemara says it goes down to a son, just like it does in halacha to Jews. The same thing is true by non-Jews, and halacha recognizes that a son would inherit the father, and that's a Torah halacha. He has every legal right to the estate as anything else. So what's the source? Where do we know that in the Torah law recognizes the Yerusha from a father to a son in the non-Jewish world? So the Gemara brings in Maseches Kedushin in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we have a pasuk, Ki Yerusha le'esav nasati es har seir. Because Moshe Rabbeinu, the beginning of Sefer Dvarim, says, that Hashem gave to Esav, Har Seir, that's his land that he was given, and the language Moshe uses to describe what Esav received is the language of a Yerusha. I gave him an inheritance to Esav as Har Seir. So you see, the Gemara brings a proof that in the non-Jewish world too, that there's a concept called a Yerusha from father to son. Very nice. The Gemara asks the following question. The Gemara says, you can't bring a proof from there. The Gemara says, V'dilma Yisrael Mumar Shaini. A Yisrael Mumar means a Jew, like an apostate Jew, a Jew who rebels against the religion and leaves it. So the Gemara says, you can't bring a proof from Esav. Esav is what's called a Yisrael Mumar. He's a Jew who rebelled. So the fact that Esav has a Yerusha, we're not asking about Esav, we're asking about the non-Jewish world. So how do you bring a proof from Esav, who's a Yisrael Mumar? Now, the Gemara accepts this question and finds another source that in the non-Jewish world, the son inherits his father. But you see from the language of the Gemara, what status is Esav? He's a Yisrael Mumar. He's a rebellious Jew. He was born from a Jewish mother, Rivka, of Yitzchak, and he left. But his status is called the Yisrael Mumar. It's a fascinating concept, and we find throughout the Chumash, this relationship between Yaakov and Esav is an interesting and unique relationship because of that. Let's take a look at a couple of those. This next source 12, is going to be in next week's Parsha. 2 weeks. We're going to Parshas Vayishlach. Vayishlach addresses the big meeting between Yaakov and Esav after Yaakov spends 22 years, as we're going to learn next week's Parsha, with his uncle Lavan. He's going to marry his 4 wives. He's going to have many children. They're going to have this big meeting when Yaakov comes back to the land of Israel. And at the end, they go their own separate ways. When the Torah describes them going their own separate ways, it says as follows: Vayikach Esav es nashav es banav es benosav. Esav takes his entire party, his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all of his property, his estate, his animals, his slaves, his servants, everything. Vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov Canaan, and he leaves because mipnei Yaakov achiv. It's as if he's leaving because of his brother or before his brother Yaakov. It's a strange. He's leaving like mipnei achiv, out of like because of his brother. Why is he leaving? Why that language? So Rashi points out the reason why he picked up all of his things now that Yaakov is back and he left. The reason is he went to Har Seir mipnei shtarcho, because there's a document that has a certain debt, an obligation to pay, which is the Gzeira of Kiger Yihiyeh Zarecha. Hashem made a promise to Avraham in a nevuah. He said, I'm going to give you this land, but it's going to come with a price tag. The price tag is your children are going to be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. They're going to be afflicted, but eventually I'm going to take them out, which of course becomes Mitzrayim. I'm going to take them out and bring them back to this land. But if you want to inherit this land, just know, Avram was told, there's a price tag. Says Rashi, why does the pasuk say, this is from Chazal, why does the pasuk say that Esav left the land when Yaakov came back because of his brother Yaakov? Because of that obligation of Kiger Yihiyeh Zarecha. Your children will be strangers in a foreign land, Hamutol al Zaro shel Yitzchak, which is imposed upon the children of Yitzchak, which includes both Yaakov and Esav. Amar, so Esav said to himself, Eilech li mikan, I want out of here. I have no portion of the gift of this land, nor in the payment of its shtar. Rashi adds the embarrassment that he sold the birthright, that he has no chelek now in the land, and he doesn't have a piece of the gift. He doesn't want to pay the price for it. I'm leaving. What do I want this for? I don't want anything to do with this. So he leaves Eretz Canaan, not to be involved because the children of Yitzchak have that obligation, and Esav is not interested in any of that. We find this exact same idea at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, when the Jewish people are getting ready to enter into the land of Israel after the whole journey in the desert. And the shortest way for them to get from where they were in the desert to the land of Israel was to cross through the land of Edom. Edom were the descendants of Esav. And so the Torah describes that Moshe sends messengers to the king of Edom and says in the top line here in source 13, Ko amar achicha Yisrael. Your brother, the Jewish people, have a message. You know all the things that have occurred to us. We went down to Mitzrayim. We were there for a long time. We were afflicted. We cried out to Hashem. He saved us. And now here we are on your border. Nabra novi artzecha, let us pass through. We're not going to drink water. We're not going to cause you any problems. Let us through. And Edom says, no deal. We're going to come out with a sword to greet you. Rashi says, Ma rola haskir kana achva. Why does Moshe say, Achicha Yisrael, your brother? The Jewish people are here. Why is he mentioning that right now? Says Rashi, Amalo Achim Anachnu, B'nai Avram, we're all brothers, you and me, Yaakov and Esav, children of Avram, children of Yitzchak. Shenemrlo Giger Yezarecha. And what happened to our Zayda Avraham? He got a promise of strangers your children will be. They're going to be afflicted. That's on both of us. You, Esav, and me, we're both children of Yitzchak, children of Avram. That obligation was on both of us. That's why your father left. Your great-great-grandfather Esav left the land to go to this place called Edom. Because he left the land because of Yaakov, because of this obligation. Therefore, you have no claim to the land because you jumped ship. You didn't want to be part of the obligation. But it was on both of us. We're brothers. We are brothers. And therefore, if you didn't pay the price, at least let us pass through your land. We paid the price. Now we're collecting our payday. We're getting the land. You opted out. At least let us pass through. And Esav says, no dice. I'm not letting you in anyway. That idea of Achicha Yisrael will appear throughout Tanakh, that Esav is referred to as our brother. Moshe uses it again in Sefer Dvarim. He says, you're passing through the border of your brother, B'nai Esav. Kiko amar achicha Yisrael, the passage that we just read. Lo ta'azov adomi, lo tita'ev adomi, ki achicha hu. When he says, do not afflict someone from Edom, he's your brother. And then in Sefer Malachi and Navi, hello, ach Esav liYaakov nu'um Hashem. Esav is a brother to Yaakov. Ahaves Yaakov, but I love Yaakov. But this idea is regularly found, and it's expressed the difference between Esav and Yishmael. Yishmael is not referred to as our brother. Our cousins we refer to him, but Yishmael is not our brother, even though he's a half-brother, but it's because he's only a half-brother. He's the son of Hagar, and therefore when the line, the legacy, the spiritual legacy of Ram goes through Yitzchak, he be Yitzchaki karelo chazera. But Yitzchak and Rivka have two equal sons. They're in the womb at the same time. It's not because Esav was weeded out in as much as it's Esav opted out. And therefore he gets the name Achicha, he's your brother, and he's a Yisrael Mumar, and he's a rebellious Jew. Listen to the way the Rambam expresses this. Hamila nitzdav above Avram v'zaro bilvad. He's talking about the halacha of non-Jews. And he says, but the mitzvah of Mila is only to the children of Avram. Avram and his seed alone have the mitzvah of bris Mila. Hashem said to Avram, you and your children after you. Yatza Zaro Shel Yishmael. So you might have thought, well, Yishmael is his Zera. Yishmael is one of his children. But no, the pasuk specifically says, Ki bi Yitzchak yikarei lecha Zera. Only through Yitzchak are you called. Is that considered your lineage, your line? And therefore, not Yishmael. Then Bnei Esav should be Chaim in Bris Milah. They were children of Yitzchak. And through him, they should have this commandment. Yatza Esav, Shor Yitzchak, Amar Yaakov. How do we know that Esav doesn't have the mitzvah of bris milah? Because Yitzchak says to Yaakov, the pasuk that we just read, when he sends Yaakov to his brother-in-law Lavan, at the end of our Parsha, he says, V'itein lechas birkas Avraham lecha u'lizarecha. That's when he gives the bracha to Yaakov, the bracha of Avram, and he says, this bracha is going to be now to you and to your children. Michlal, says the Rambam, Shehu levado zaro shel Avraham. Only Yaakov is considered the zera of Avraham. Hamachzik bidato uvidarko hayishara. He who upkeeps his religion and his appropriate way, his derech hayashar, the straight and narrow path, the morality with which he chose to live in the derech of Avraham. Hey mechuyavim b'mila. You'll note the difference. The exclusion of Yishmael is a pasuk. The Torah says he's out. The exclusion of Esav is because Yitzchak says it's only you, Yaakov, because Esav has opted out. In the Rambam's language, hamachzik bidato v'darko hayishara. He who upkeeps his way of life and his appropriate way of stuck of a chesed and mishpat. That's who descends from Yitzchak. What happened to Esav? He opted out. And as Hashem says, I gave you the Torah in the month of Sivan. If he would ever desire to come back, I would take him back. Now, this brings us all the way back to how is it that Yitzchak is misled, is so fooled into wanting to give this bracha and to loving his son Esav? Rosh Yeshiva understood as follows, and he develops the following idea, which he's going to take. We're going to see this many, many times. He uses the terms avodas chutz and avodas pnim, the inner avoda and literally the outer avoda. The avoda inside, the service of Hashem inside, and the avoda, the service of Hashem outside. And the idea that he develops is as follows. There are two types of services of Hashem that a Jew we can do both, but there are two types that exist. One is what he calls, again, the inner avoda, is that when you think about the way that a person serves Hashem, there's the goal, the ya'ad, the purpose, and then there's the method. How is it done? So the avoda inside would be like the Kohanim serving in the Beis HaMikdash. Everything that they're doing is bikdusha uvitahara, with sanctity, with purity, and is in a spiritual realm. There's also a form of an avoda that requires being out in the world and managing and building and planting and dealing with every single thing that the world requires. And there are two paths. The path inside is purely spiritual in nature, in form, in goal. It's to serve Hashem and to serve Him in a spiritual manner. Outside the walls of the Beis HaMedrash, so to speak, outside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, there's also a form of serving Hashem. That form of serving Hashem has the same purpose, the same goal, the same spiritual nature, but the form it takes is completely different. The form it takes is one which uses one's hands to build, to construct, to deal with the world and make it work. For example, we find this example, this idea. There are lots of examples for this. We'll try to develop this idea. Let's take a couple of examples in the Torah itself. Gan Eden. What was a Jew's job in Gan Eden? In Gan Eden, had we stayed there, would have been to sit and just learn Torah all day long, to serve Hashem in any way. There's no harvesting, there's no planting, there's no anything. Everything you need was there, as long as they were there. Even the language the Torah uses, la'avda u'lishamra, to work it and to guard it, Chazal understand in a spiritual nature. Once you leave Gan Eden, what was the klal of the curse given to mankind? You no longer can eat from fruit off the trees. Trees are easy, you don't do anything. Put a little seed in the ground, it's going to give you fruit every year. Crops, grain, wheat, every year you're out there in the field slaving away to be able to produce grain. Not a simple thing. Somebody's got to do that. That becomes a new way of living life. We find the same pattern in the Midbar. The Jews getting ready to enter into Eretz Yisrael for 40 years. For 40 years, they're in a bubble. It's a bubble in which they do nothing but soak in the spiritual nature of being with a Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem's presence in the desert. There's nothing to do. They didn't have to wash their clothing. They didn't have to worry about food. It was a purely spiritual existence until they enter into Eretz Yisrael. And when they enter into Eretz Yisrael, they exit the bubble, and there's a requirement to build. You have to build a house. Somebody's got to put on work boots, lay the bricks, put down the plaster, paint the walls. Somebody's got to do that. Now, inside that Beis HaMedrash, somebody's going to be learning, davening, but somebody has to make that possible. And there's a partnership amongst the Jewish people of the different tasks that are done to create what needs to be done for the service of Hashem. Using as an example, I use this example, it's not a perfect example in many, many ways, but just think of, let's say, a yeshiva. A yeshiva has, what's the goal of the yeshiva? What's the purpose of the yeshiva? Why does it exist? So the reason why the yeshiva exists is so that students can learn Torah. That's why it exists. And in order to do so, you need a Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbi who are going to teach Torah. That's why the yeshiva exists. Every good yeshiva is going to need an executive director. The executive director is going to manage everything to allow the yeshiva to exist. Fundraising, managing the bills and the taxes and talking to government officials to get permits. There's 1,000 things that need to happen in order for the Rosh Yeshiva to be able to teach Torah. The reason the yeshiva exists is not just spiritual in form, but spiritual in purpose. But in order for that to succeed, there needs to be somebody who makes sure the lights are on. Those two are partners. They're equal partners. The person who's involved in making it happen and the person who's involved in fulfilling its purpose to teach Torah, because you can't have one without the other. They need to function together, what will later become known as Yisachar Zvulun. Zvulun's going to go out to the world and earn a living, and he's going to support his brother Yisachar. And you're able to sit and learn all day. That's amazing. It's not for me. I can't all that. I'm going to do what I can. But I want to have a portion. I want to be able to support that. If Yisachar doesn't have a Zvulun, it doesn't work. That's not the world we live in. And we find these Gan Eden, and then we're exiled from Gan Eden. That's the existence we had temporarily in the desert, and then we have to enter into Eretz Yisrael. And we need, every spiritual endeavor needs a partnership with somebody, something, group of people who are going to make it happen. In nature, it doesn't look spiritual, but it is. It is, and it's a partner in everything, but that requires the intention of, that's why I want to do this, in order to be able to further the spiritual mission of the Jewish people. Yitzchak Avinu has twins. He sees twins that are born. And immediately upon Vayigdalu Na'arim, as they grow, Esav, again, going all the way back to the top, the Torah describes him as an Ish Yodea Tzayid, an Ish Sadeh. He is a person who's an Ish, a man who knows to hunt, and a man of the fields. Yaakov is an Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. Yaakov clearly becomes the guy who's just going to sit and learn. He has no connection to the fields, to hunting, to everything that's going to go on out there. But he is the guy who's going to sit for 14 years straight, as Chazal say, even without going to sleep in the yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. He's a Ish Tam Yoshev Ohalim. And Yitzchak sees his two sons and says, I understand what Hashem did. He gave me a son who's a Yodei Tzayid, an Ish Sadeh, a man of the field, a man who knows how to hunt, a man who knows how to be involved in the world and all that goes on into that. And he gave me an Ish Tam. What a perfect partnership for the development of Klal Yisrael. And the Jewish people are going to develop through this, through the partnership of that which is going to take place. Whenever you see the words Sadeh and Ohel, Ohel always is like a reference to the spiritual tent. Or Beis HaMikdash is referred to as an Ohel. The Mishkan is referred to as an Ohel. And the Sadeh, the field, refers to being a man of the world, being able to go out there, manipulate the world, understand it, control it, conquer it. And Yodei Tzayid, to hunt. So the Rosh Yeshiva understood when you read the pasuk Vaye'ehav Yitzchak es Esav, the way to read the pasuk is Vaye'ehav Yitzchak gam et Esav. It's like Yitzchak also loved Esav. It's not that he loved Esav and not Yaakov. It's that he also loved Esav because he saw what Esav was supposed to be, what he was supposed to partner, what he was supposed to contribute. But Rivka only loved Yaakov. Rivka saw that might be true as to what Esav was destined to do, but that she saw that Esav threw it away. Esav was not interested in taking and marshaling all of his kochos, all of his talents and strengths and manipulating the world in order to further a spiritual mission. He was just interested in doing it for his own sake, to do whatever it is that he wanted. But Yitzchak saw what was supposed to have been a Yodea Tzayid. Rosh Yeshiva understood the famous medrash that is the reason why we assume Esav was so wicked, is because the medrash says when Rivka was pregnant with the twins and she was having a difficult pregnancy and they were agitating within her, so Rashi quotes the medrash that when she would pass by a shul, a base medrash, she would feel kicking inside because it was Yaakov trying to get out. And when she would pass a house of Avodah Zarah, Esav would kick. And so she was all confused by the kicking whenever she would pass these two places. And that's led most of us to believe that Esav was wicked from the beginning. Now that medrash needs to be understood. There's no Yetzer Hara inside the womb. What exactly does it mean? What were they fighting about? There are many midrashim, many deep concepts within that idea. Rosh Yeshiva suggested that the idea that Yaakov just wanted to be in the base medrash because that's who he was. He just wanted to be involved in that world. But Esav was a man out there in the world. He was the one who wanted to tackle, so to speak, the houses of idolatry, like his father Avram, to fix, to bring him in. That was his nature, was Yaakov Avinu didn't want to be anywhere near it. I don't want to deal with that. I just want to be inside my spiritual chamber. Leave me alone. But that's half of Klal Yisrael. There's another aspect of Klal Yisrael that goes out and conquers, in the spirit, in the Kabbalistic term, to gather the nitzotzos of Kedusha, to gather the sparks of sanctity that exist out in the world. We all know there are different types of Jews out there. If you want to use broad strokes, Chabad has mastered that of, I'm going to go out everywhere, anywhere where there's a Jew, I'm going to go out there and bring him in. And you know what that means? That means living in a place where I might be the only Jew for 100 miles. I might be out there giving classes in a bar. I'm going to be out there going out there to the college campuses. That's a koach in Klal Yisrael that says, I'm going to go out there into the world and gather whatever sparks of Kedusha there are and work and manipulate, all for the sake of bringing into the spirit of holiness. There are other Jews who, if you told them to live in a community where they're the only Jew for 400 miles, I can't. How can I, what do I do with my kids? How am I going to make Shabbos? Where am I going to make kosher food? That's not for me, and it's not appropriate. And for some people, it's not appropriate. They need to be in the spiritual wall. That's where they're supposed to be. Yitzchak saw two types, two paths, but when they function together, and Esav is dealing with all of his worldly powers for the sake of furthering the spiritual mission of Yaakov, it's an amazing shidduch. Go back now to how did Esav fool his father? So Rashi quotes the Medrash that he said, how do I take off Meiser from Teven and from Melech, from salt and straw? So he said, where did Chazal pick up that particular example from? I did a whole recipe. So the Maral said, because those are things that are on their own, they're not food items themselves. They enhance the food item like salt, or they protect the food item like straw. Esav said, Abba, can't be you don't take Meiser from these products. They're so critical. They add the taste to the food like salt. They protect the grain like the straw. Has to be that's elevated to the level of sanctity like everything else, right, Abba? And his father said, that's my son Esav. That's taking those elements of the world that protect the kernel and allowing the kernel to become what it can become, to add a little spice of life, to give flavor to the food. And Esav saying, that also needs Meiser. No, Abba, that's also part of this, bringing everything into the world of sanctity. And he fooled his father, not just by asking some halachic question. He asked a specific halachic question that said, my role is also in that. This idea of the salt and the straw should get the ties. And Yitzchak saw in that, that's going to be my son. But Rivka was right. Esav really was just fooling his father. Esav didn't want any part of bringing in his strengths into the world of Kedusha and sanctity and being, so to speak, the executive director to allow the spiritual mission to flourish. He wanted to raise money to be able to party and have a good time. Yitzchak wants to give the bracha. Which bracha does he intend to give to his son Esav? It's a bracha of physical prosperity, of Gashmia. So you should have dew, you should have fatness of the earth, you should be a powerful nation. He knew he thought he was giving it to Esav. He never wanted to give the bracha of Avram. He was giving the bracha to Esav, what Esav needed to be successful. And Rivka sees, but we need that in the Jewish people. But it can't go to Esav, he's out. He opted out. So she says to Yaakov, you need to do this. And there's only one way to do this. You can only take that by becoming Esav. That power that he has is needed in the Jewish people. It was supposed to be split between you and your brother, but your brother opted out. If you sit in the Beis Medrash all your life, that's not going to work. We need that strength that Esav had, the Odea Tzayid, the ability to know how to hunt, to take the nitzotos of Kedusha, the ability to be a man of the field. How does Yaakov earn this bracha of Esav? He literally does an Esav. He becomes a manipulator of the world. He dresses up like Esav. He fools his father like Esav. He goes in and plays the role of Esav to say, I can be this person too. I can manage. My primary role, of course, is an Ishtam Yoshev Oalim. I'm going to sit and learn. But I can be that too for Klal Yisrael, and through that he takes the bracha. And when Esav later comes in and says, "What's going on, Abba?" and his father Vayecharad Charada Gedolah is a great trembling when he realizes he thought he had two equal partners, and Esav had opted out, but that his son Yaakov, who knew to fool me, he uses the same word, latzud litzayid, to fool, to hunt the game. Like I use that language for you, Esav. Who knew to come in and do this? V'gam baruch yihiyah. And indeed, he will be blessed, as the Ramban writes. The bracha that I gave, it landed on him. It's his now, and there's nothing you can do about it, Esav, because he came in and he did that. We're going to stop here. This idea is going to be extended next week as we learn about Yaakov's 4 wives and the children that he's going to have. This is going to continue, really, we're going to take this theme of the avodas chutz and the avodas pnim, that which is the inner avoda inside the walls of the Beis HaMedrash, inside the Beis HaMikdash, and the other form of avoda to manipulate the world and bring it into the realm of sanctity and kedusha to further the spiritual message. We're going to see how this idea plays itself out as we continue with next week, and hopefully we'll put it all together, and then we'll see it come up over and over again throughout the Rosh Yeshiva's Shiurim on Chumash. I'll leave you with that. We'll pick up Mirz Hashem next week.